Welcome to Discovering. We all know that last year's winter and spring took its toll on our deer population, and this year's deep snow and cold weather will only make matters worse. Tonight, we'll take a look at their current status and the key role that logging operations play in their survival during a long, hard winter.
We're going to lose deer anyway, but we're going to lose more deer without these timber harvests.
And to talk with outdoor writer and veteran deer hunter Richard Smith about his thoughts on changing 3 points back to 3 inches on our combo deer tag.
It's time for a change to go back to what was working, what was accepted by UP hunters.
So sit back, put your feet up, it's Monday night and time for Discovering.
The secret streams that flow beneath the cliffs of colored stone. Forest thick and healthy with birch and pine and oak. Surrounded by the greatest lakes this world has ever known. The black bear's awesome presence as he roams the hills and fields. Call of the timber wolf, the loon's lonesome trill, the eagle soaring high above, the trout lies deep and still. These are what I treasure, the only way I measure feelings that I have for this fine land. There is so much to discover when you're a long-time lover of northern Michigan.
UP winters are always rough on our deer. It's a tough game of survival, dictated by the availability of food and cover. On a severe winter, natural food sources can be hidden under several feet of snow, drastically lowering a deer's odds of survival. Human intervention can be an important factor in helping to raise those odds. In this first of a two-part series, we'll take a look at the role logging can play in providing a much-needed food source when the deer need it most. Logging has been going on, seems like forever in the UP, and I suspect deer have been reaping the benefits of an extra winter food source ever since.
Right now we're in what's called the Petrel Wintering Complex. It's one of our deer yards that falls within the high snowfall zone. And there's pretty much no place other than here that has these kinds of winter conditions. It's a very severe winter here each and every winter. This year we've got about 30 inches of snow on the ground and over 250 inches of total accumulated snow so far during the winter. What we're in right now is a cedar harvest where we do strip cuts in cedar to regenerate cedar, and we also attract a lot of deer to these areas. And you can see in the areas where the equipment's been working, where they've been skidding and cutting, the deer can move pretty freely here, and we're just looking at one small part of the harvest. But the deer are able to move more freely through here because we don't have the snow depths. And these types of harvests are really important in the high snowfall zone because the snow is so deep that browse is not available. So we have very little food availability, so timber harvests are necessary. And we try to do that on state land through winter specifications in our deer wintering complexes if we have low deer densities in those areas. Cedar is a preferred winter food for deer, but it's very difficult to regenerate in most areas, and that's pretty important to say that we do this here, but in most other areas of the UP we cannot regenerate cedar. So, but in this particular area, because of high snowfall, we've done these strip cuts, and this has been done for decades and decades here in the Petrel. And we're trying to increase the size of that harvest because we've got enough cedar in this management area to support that as long as we can regenerate it. So we're looking at varying age classes of cedar throughout time, so we can continue to rotate some of it and utilize it for forest products, but importantly create a lot of cover and food resources for the deer. The surrounding landscape is mature cedar that will be left, but we've cut these strips. In the mature cedar, there's a lot of established trail networks. The deer have a much more difficult time in that deeper snow, so they establish these trail networks and come in and out of these cedar harvests and then back to their bedding areas throughout the winter.
Well, what we're looking at here is a selection cut in one of our higher quality northern hardwood stands, mainly consisting of sugar maple and red maple. What a selection harvest is going through and specifically picking out trees to cut. It's a marked job, so we'll go through and we'll actually mark everything that we want removed, and we focus on removing anything with defect or disease, and then we kind of go for spacing and creating gaps to bring light into the forest floor so that we can have regeneration, start to grow some more sugar maple and red maple and what other species are available out here. This particular site is restricted to a winter cut due to its proximity to the deer yard. By the way the crow flies, we're only talking a 1.5 miles, 2 miles away from where the cedar is, where the deer are yarding up. And so they will actually migrate back and forth and come in here, and they will be browsing all the hardwood tops here, which is very beneficial for them because there's very little browse available for them. So having this cut in the winter provides a very valuable food source for them.
The deer that are in what we call the petrel wintering complex come from both the north and the south. There's tagging data that was done quite a long time ago that shows some of these deer even come from Big Springs area, or 20 miles away from here to yard in this particular deer wintering complex. So just these few acres of harvests in this deer yard are servicing deer from other DMUs even that travel here. So it's really important to improve the habitat where we have the opportunity to do so through harvesting and other different means that we're using to improve habitat in the complex and around the complex for deer. So that, that migration is a learned behavior that's passed down through generations. So it's important to sustain these harvests, such as the cedar harvest. We harvested very slowly throughout the winter and assure that we regenerate the cedar. But we have many other harvests, and those are called concentration areas. So we have within the complex, the deer yard or the deer wintering complex, that can be 10,000 acres or more in size or less. But within that complex, then of course you have several concentration areas where the deer are, and that's notably in timber sales in the high snowfall zone. So we put winter specs on our hardwood sales because they feed on hardwood tops as well. Although they prefer cedar, the research shows that all deer lose weight in the winter. It's a built-in defense mechanism. But they lose less weight on cedar than they do on other types of deciduous browse. But here we've got, we have a lot of white birch that's in this harvest. I don't see any right here, but we've got white birch and ash. So those are two deciduous species that they're browsing on in here, in addition to the cedar. And we have other harvests where we're harvesting mostly hard and soft maple, and there's a lot of deer held in those areas right now through the winter. So as long as we can sustain those harvests, those deer will feed on those tops until they're able to disperse from the deer yards, because there's much more preferable food elsewhere. They just can't get to it right now because of the snow depth. So once they disperse from the deer yards, we see a lot of deer showing up in these grassland openings, and we're lucky here because we own most of this deer wintering complex is owned by the DNR, so we can micromanage it in a sense. We have a lot of openings, grassland openings, that we're now maintaining and enhancing and farming for deer. We're planting a lot of clover and annual and perennial rye, white Dutch and red clover as more of a green source for them in the spring. And the deer certainly gather in those areas. We call them breakout areas. They gather there in the spring, and those areas are really important for providing that evergreen vegetation for those does that are in their third trimester of pregnancy and generally stressed animals that are coming out of a tough winter. So those openings are really important. So we're creating more of those and enhancing them to the best of our ability. It is a very severe winter. We're probably going to be seeing a lot more deer mortality here as the month wears on. When their metabolism picks up, they need to eat more, and this is just not good enough to sustain them. So no matter how much cedar we have on the ground, if the winter doesn't break until late spring, we're going to lose deer. have found a number of deer kills, and we always try to look at the femur bones of deer that are even killed on the highway near deer wintering complexes. We look at the bone marrow, the fat content in the bone marrow, and the deer actually look quite good in these areas where we have timber sales right now. And they typically do in February. They're pretty healthy looking. We're not seeing any bones protruding. A lot of the fawns that are out there look pretty decent. We've seen a few fuzzy-faced fawns where they're starting to lose the fat content in their necks. But we don't have a lot of fawns to begin with because last winter, as you recall, it was very mild during early winter, but then it became very severe and hung on into April. So we had a lot of snow into April and some parts of the UP even into May. So we had very poor fawn production this year as a result of that, and fawn recruitment from the previous year. So that one difficult winter affects two age classes of deer. And now that we've got a second winter back-to-back, that's going to affect more age classes. So we're going to have the fawns that we're trying to carry through the winter this year. Those that survive, because there's fewer deer, they'll be in better health. But we might have problems with fawn production again this year because this winter is hanging on and because the snow depths are so deep right now. So these harvests, of course, concentrate a lot of deer. You can have 100 or 200 deer in an acre of land feeding on these tops, and that's both good and bad because from a predator standpoint, of course, it's easier for them to ambush the deer. The deer have these established trail networks that they stay on those trail networks, and the surrounding area is very deep and snow covered. So what coyotes and wolves can do is run them off of those trail networks, and that's how they're able to get them. So, we're supporting more deer, and yet we're making it easier for predators, of course, to kill deer. But that's just the nature of timber harvesting in the winter. In this particular area, fortunately, we've got several really effective coyote trappers and hunters. That we've got a lot of coyotes, and we always will. There's also wolves in the area. Mario and I just found a kill that was a deer that was probably killed a couple of days ago, and that's just part of the process. We're going to lose a few deer to predators, but we lose much more to a difficult winter. That's important to say that.
Loggers spend as much, if not more, time in the woods than just about anybody, and see things on a daily basis that most of us only run across once in a while. I paid a visit to a northern Menominee County logging operation to get some logger input on this year's deer situation.
Basically, this is a yarding area, so a lot of deer are probably coming in from different areas once they figure out that we're logging here. Somewhere between, I would say, 500 to 1,000. It's hard to tell because there's so many of them. I mean, they just follow us around as we're cutting, probably because they feel safer, between the predators taking them down. From years past, we normally don't see that many deer in. I mean, you always had deer, but not as many as this, because of the snow and the cold weather. Most of them are looking pretty decent, but some of them are looking pretty thin and ratty. Probably in the last 5 years or so, I've probably run across 1 or 2 predator kills. For the most part, we don't see them. Once in a while, you find a dead deer, probably from starvation or something, but for the most part. But this year is an exception. I'm finding several deer so far just killed with the throats tore open and whatnot. 1 or 2 bites taken out of them, and that's it. Some of them not even touched, just killed and left laying there. I've seen some that were eating some, but all the ones I've been finding so far, have not hardly any of them been eaten any more than half. Mostly birds picking on them after they've been killed. So rib cages and everything still intact. So it looks like that's more just killing them and the birds picking on them. And as you can see, they're clipping the buds. As the buds are no longer available, they start clipping the sticks off like that. And that's when you start having the problems, because when they start eating that, there's not a whole lot there, I don't think. And there's obviously food value in the buds, but I've seen years where there's nothing left but sticks like that, as they're chewing the wood and everything, even on dead trees and everything. So
So these winter harvests are very, very important in the high snowfall zone. If you can imagine not having any harvests on state land or corporate lands in these deer yards of the high snowfall zone, the food availability would be much less, and we would lose more deer during those winters. We're going to lose deer anyway, but we're going to lose more deer without these timber harvests, whether they be cedar harvests like this one or some of our deciduous harvests. And it's important to note too that these harvests are not, I mean, they're important for deer in the winter, but there's many other ancillary benefits of these harvests for other game and non-game wildlife species. As long as we can mix up age classes of aspen and hardwood and cedar and other swamp conifers, that's always a good thing to have varying age classes, varying stand sizes, and then we're benefiting not just deer, but a number of game and non-game wildlife.
Here's a quick look at what's happening around the UP. Hunting and habitat go hand in hand. That's why the National Wild Turkey Federation has launched Save the Habitat, Save the Hunt. To do your part, join the Brule River chapter of the National Wild Turkey Federation for their March 18th meeting at 6 p.m. Central at Dina Mia's Restaurant in Florence. A reminder to turkey hunters, leftover spring turkey licenses went on sale to unsuccessful applicants on March 10th and will go on sale to all other hunters on March 17th. And the Tequamanon Falls State Park will host its annual Maple Sugaring Day at the park's Upper Falls area on Saturday, March 22nd from 12 to 4. Prior to 2008, the Upper Peninsula's combination deer license included one restricted tag and one unrestricted tag, allowing hunters to take a buck with 3-inch antlers or more. I spoke with well-known outdoor writer and veteran deer hunter Richard Smith about his efforts to make changes to the current license structure.
Deer hunters a lot of times like to know what they can do to bring about a change to improve deer hunting in the UP. And one of the things they can do is to sign a petition I started on change.org that will return the combination deer license in the UP back to what it was prior to 2008, which would be one unrestricted tag valid for a buck with 3-inch spikes or better, and one restricted tag that's only valid for a buck with 4 points or more on an antler. The way the combination deer license was prior to 2008 was widely accepted, widely understood, and it wasn't broken. The regulations that were adopted in 2008 were an attempt to fix something that wasn't broken. The regulations were designed to protect a segment of the yearling population, but they also protect bucks that are 2.5 up to 5.5 years old. The DNR has data from their DNR check stations over a 10-year period. It shows up to 8% of the 5.5-year-old bucks have less than 3 points on an antler from the UP, and 17% of the 2-year-old bucks have less than 3 points on an antler. Regulations that protect bucks that are 2 to 5 years old goes far beyond the scope of the regulations and results in poor deer management. Some of the bucks that hunters are forced to pass up under the antler restrictions on the combo deer license die during the winter. They died last winter. This winter is even worse. We could lose even more deer this winter. A minimum of 50,000 deer were lost last winter. During the fall of 2012, deer hunters only harvested 34,000. So that puts in perspective how much impact winter has on our deer population here in the UP. Last fall was the 6th year under those regulations. If they were working, the buck harvest would have gone up in the UP during the fall of 2013. Instead, the buck harvest went down because a lot of the bucks that hunters were forced to pass up died last winter. The Department of Natural Resources is supposed to use scientific wildlife management based on passage of Proposal G in 1996, which was voted on by a majority of Michigan voters. Every year since 2008, they've asked the question among hunters how many of them support the current regulations in the UP with 2 restricted buck tags on the combo license. Support has been less than 60% each year. And on top of that, the DNR has conducted deer hunter opinion surveys during 2006 and 2012. In both of those surveys, 70% of the hunters have supported the combination deer license with one restricted tag to a buck with 4 points or more, and one tag unrestricted. So the level of support for that license, that combo license, is extremely high. And when the regulations were adopted in 2008, changing both tags to both buck tags to restricted, there was supposed to be a moratorium on antler point restrictions in place at the time, and that was ignored. The benefit of going to a combo deer license with one unrestricted tag like it was before 2008, it gives hunters the maximum flexibility to decide to shoot a younger buck toward the end of the season if they don't see a bigger one. Voluntary antler point restrictions are very popular in the UP. A lot of hunters prefer to shoot the older bucks. But if the only buck you see by the end of the season is a forkhorn or a spike, you should be able to shoot it. And going back to the unrestricted tag doesn't take away from anyone who wants to practice more stringent antler point restrictions. Anybody in the state can wait for a 6-point or 8-point, put those personal limits on themselves and do it on a voluntary basis. It will not eliminate the possibility of practicing more strict antler point restrictions. And many hunters have been doing that for years on a voluntary basis. So hunters who want to do something to improve not only their hunting success, but deer management in the UP can go to change.org in my petition and sign on. And the number of signatures will be passed on to the DNR and Natural Resources Commission. It's time for a change to go back to what was working, what was accepted by UP hunters. And I hope I can count on the support of other UP hunters.
You can find a link to Richard's petition and much more on my website at realoutdoorsup.com and click on Helpful Links. Well, that's all for this week. I hope you enjoyed watching. We'll see you next week right here on Discovering. Be sure to tune in next week for part 2 when we'll take a look at the role supplemental feeding plays in helping our deer to make it through this tough winter.